Got it. Okay. Good noon, everyone. And today, in the next few minutes or so, I'd like to share with you some interesting stuff that have to about the Joshua's altar at Mount Ebal, or is it really the altar at Mount Ebal? Ebal. Um, but I also hopefully connect it to the holiday of Shavuot, which for me takes me back away even over 20 years ago. I was stationed in Shechem in the spring of 1996. We were the unit that implemented the Oslo Accords in Shechem, which was quite an interesting time to be there. A lot calmer than it was the following Shoot Sukkot, but at the time, our primary responsibilities were guarding the D9. This is called a D9. We just had to sit in like a little hut and guard it. What was the story is during when the Oslo Accords meant that the army wanted to build many bypass roads in that area. And so they did a lot of large movements of earth movement. So they had these D9s, and to bring it back, ship it back and forth to every night was a lot more expensive and a lot more hassle than to have 4 soldiers sit there all night. So we spent a lot of time doing that. The other thing that we did is, you can see here, we were doing tatzpiot. We were overlooking, this is where on Har Kabir, overlooking Wadi Farah of Nachal Tirza. And our main objective was to see whether or not the fledgling Palestinian Authority, Palestinian police, were following the new guidelines, restrictions, and if they didn't, we would write it down in a book, and that would be used. I don't know what. We wasted a lot of time up there, but it gave us a lot of time to talk and read and do all kinds of other things. We also did this without cell phones and smartphones, so that was a completely different generation. But in the context of this, on Shavuot, or Erev Shavuot, the army decided to allow a group of yeshiva students spend the entire Shavuot holiday at Kever Yosef. Now, you can look it up, 1996, it was like this year, so it was a Friday and a Shabbat. And I had the great fortune of spending 48 hours on Har Gerizim. We were on an outpost overlooking Kever Yosef. The idea was that if there was a mass of 300 people going to storm the Kever, we would alert the authorities in time. That was more or less the idea. But it gave us a lot of time to talk, and I was there with some good friends, and part of the things you're going to hear at the end of when we connect Har Gerizim to the holiday of Shavuot actually began their formulation. They've developed over the years, but they began in discussions that I had overlooking Kever Yosef, Shavuot 1996. Let's not talk about how long ago that was. Okay. The story of Har Ebal begins and ends really with one very, very special individual that I was actually fortunate to meet with a few times and had some very good discussions with. His name was Adam Zertal. Now, a few things about his biography may assist us in understanding some of the later things that are going to develop regarding the site. Adam Zertal was a kibbutznik. He was born and raised in kibbutz and Shemer. He went to university and studied things that would help him be a good kibbutznik, and economics and things like that. And he returned to the kibbutz and spent his about almost a decade, 2 decades, working in different positions around the kibbutz, mostly administrative, but also within the agricultural parts of the kibbutz and so on. In 1973, as a officer in the Handasa Kravit, in the engineering corps. He was severely injured near the Suez Canal. I was severely injured. He describes it in his book, but very, very injured. And he spent almost a year in the hospital. So after the year in the hospital, which he went through many different, you can imagine the reading he did, and that he decided he wants to change his life course, and he went to study archaeology. And he studies archaeology, and even though he was he was still a little hard walking, he became enamored by two features of archaeology. One is the biblical period. Two is a tool of archaeology, which is one of the most misunderstood and sometimes misused or underused tools in archaeology, and that's the regional survey. A survey is an actual tool, and in addition to excavating a site, a survey is used to determine sometimes where to excavate, but it can also be used as an independent tool. And one of the things that he did, and it's really one of his magnum opus. I mean, he has many other researches that some will mention today, others will leave for another time. But his book, which is the Seker Ramat Menashe, or more exactly Seker Har Menashe, which is, this is two of the editions. There are, I think it's 5 or 6 krachim in the end. There are 6 editions to it. Is one of the most well done and comprehensive surveys ever done. I don't know that much about surveys done outside of Israel, but in regard to the ones that are done in Israel, it's really a few rungs above, a few degrees better than anything else that was done. Just so people understand, there were already surveys done by the PEF, but in the SWP, the Survey of Western Palestine. But the tool today has become very advanced. The idea, using this, people that aren't familiar with the survey, is you have 10 to 15 people that go out to an area. They stand go about arm's length to people, so it's within the corona, within the 2 meters, and you walk across an area, not necessarily picking up, but documenting every single element, artifact that relates to human existence. What does that mean? It depends on the survey. Some surveys will only document certain, archaeological sites. But as you can see here, he did this is the, he did all the major agricultural elements and all the major nature, the different types of trees, which are all very useful when you do a comprehensive study of a geographical study. So it's not just a tool for archaeologists, it's a tool for geographers, it's a tool for other geologists, and so on and so forth. If you're interested, though, in trying to understand his outcome, because to properly understand what was found in Har Ebal, you must understand it within the greater context of what is found in that area and his conclusions from that area. Okay, and he did take the time to write it out for the layman, in addition to the academic volumes. By the way, anybody have Insomnia, Seker is a very good book to read. It's not a reading book, it's a reference book. But the Amnolad, the book which he wrote, summarizes all of the most of the things that he found, or the main discoveries, and all of the drama that took place with the discovery. Because he started the Seker in the early 1980s. It actually started in late 1970s. But in 1980, as he combed the area, now understand, combing the area in a way that really was unprecedented at the time, he found hundreds of sites from all different time periods. but particularly from what we call the Iron One time period, namely 1200 or 1300 BC until 1000 BC, until the beginning of the United Monarchy. Okay, what was so interesting about these sites is that they were almost all one period sites, one or two, meaning there was no, when I say period, I don't mean time period, I mean that there was no succession. There was a person built a site, built a house, built a farmhouse, lived there for 10, 15, 100, 200 years, and left. And no one ever lived there again, and no one ever lived in the same place. Now, that is also because of where they were built, in a very difficult area. Almost all of the sites were built in places that did not have sufficient water resources, which is a very interesting indicator. And the pottery that was found, very simple pottery, is what we're later going to call the Israelite pottery. It's not Canaanite, it's not Egyptian, it's not Philistine. It's similar to some of the Canaanite, but again, it's very simple, very coarse, and it fits within the context of what Adam Zertal is going to identify is the initial settlement of the Israelite tribes. And we'll get back to this a little bit later. But within the context of this, around the year 1980, he is combing the sites and finding all these things. He finds on the side of Mount Gerizim and Mt Ebal, he finds a very, very unique site. And we're going to talk about that in a second. I see I have this here. Just one sentence before we move on is that the conclusion of his survey is, and particularly the findings of the Iron One period, is that he documents, or he claims that the early tribes of Israel originally all came to this region. Okay, and you can see how he assumes there. They were here for a generation or two, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years. And from here is where they dispersed to the rest of the country. He is saying this not based on the biblical account, and it is very similar to some of the aspects of the account in the end of the second half of the book of Joshua and in the beginning of the book of Judges, where you have the tribe of Judah fighting in Nachal Bezek, and you have all kinds of very interesting anomalies regarding the early tribes. But the idea being is they came in as one from Transjordan, weren't able to settle the Canaanite areas because they were not strong enough. They did not take the initiative. And as they developed and as they gained the strength, they started to they moved to Shiloh, which became the later base, and from there spread out to the rest of the country, down to the south in Judah and up to the Galilee, and so on and so forth. So that's the basic picture, and that's what he describes here in his book. We'll come back to this a little bit later when it's relevant, but just to understand, that was his conclusion based on the survey. All of this is the context for which he finds this very unique structure in Har Eval. Now, I was fortunate enough to visit this during my tour guide course, over now almost 20 years ago. But it is a very difficult place to get to. There are groups that go there. Doubt they go there now, but they go there. I'm sure we can share anecdotes of going there. But for those of you that are not familiar, Shechem, later called Neapolis, or today Nablus, resides between two prominent towering hills, known today as Har Gerizim and Har Eval. Har Gerizim to the south, Har Eval to the north. Okay, from some angles you can look at them and it looks like Gerizim has got all of the vegetation and Eval none. It depends how you make the picture. And so some people like to say that the Har Bracha, that's where the Yishuv Har Bracha is up here, the Samaritans and the other sites is up over here. Eval was seemingly bare. There's an army base at the very top, which you're not allowed to go anywhere near. It's a very important intelligence base. And below it, on the other side over here, is where they found Hirbet el Burnat, which looks a little bit like this is the aerial view of it. Now, understand, in what we know of biblical Shechem, okay, right near the refugee camp of Balata is the actual Tel Balata. Today, this is a very poor photograph that I was able to find. This is during the excavations. You can see some very prominent structures and some very well-built buildings. They have some Middle Bronze buildings there. We're not going to discuss Shechem, but you should know, and that's also be relevant later, is that we do have quite a good understanding of what Shechem looked like during the biblical period. It was relatively small, but we still know pretty much most of what was in the city. And the outskirts of the city have also been, most of them have been very interesting Roman finds, especially tombs that were found in that area. So during this survey, they came across a huge pile of stones. Now, you looking at it, again, this is what more or less it looked like before anybody looked at it from above or looked at it from the side. But as they started to clear away from the stones, they started to look at it from above, it seemed to have clear right angles within walls, and there were, I don't see your chats immediately. I'm going to put the chat in the corner here. Okay, people are adding things, but we'll have time at the end to there. Now, so as they started to excavate, and they excavated there on and off between 1982 to 1989, there was one very peculiar thing they found. And this is before they started to really analyze the pottery and the other artifacts that were coming up. And that was, there was no door. Now, any structure, whether it's a house, a guard tower, or whatever, normally has a doorway. Now, the well-built walls, and you can see this from the plan, did not seem. This is, again, a few more photographs from, this is when it was already, this is already after a little bit of reconstruction, but here more, where's the here? You can see there was no real doorway. And so they were a little bit puzzled. Now, the drama and the discussion of how they found it involves the nearby Yishuv of Shavei Shomron, when one of the religious members of his things brought him a kahati, which had a diagram similar to this of the Mizbeach from the Second Temple period, completely not the same time period, but the idea, he did not go there looking for Joshua's altar, nor is it in the place that anybody would have expected to find it. And we'll get to this a little bit later, but understand that the intuition of anybody reading the biblical story is that Joshua's altar, and again, we'll get to the details in the verses a little bit later, but hopefully it's known to everyone, was situated between Har Gerizim and Har Ebal, which 6 tribes were on each, and the altar and the Levites were in the middle. Were near the city of Shechem. But on the this is not just is this on the mountain of Ebal, it's facing, you can see some of the view, it's facing the north. It's facing Wadi Farah. It's quite distant from Wadi Farah. It's quite a distance from Nachal Tirza. And you can't see anything of the city of Shechem. You're completely out of its view. So initially, it wasn't that you can't claim that he was a biblical fanatic looking to prove the biblical story. He was a very good surveyor who came across a very peculiar building. And after he became familiar with the story in the Bible and with the different laws of how the Bible says an altar was supposed to be built, he quickly became, not quickly, it took him a year or two, but he became convinced that not just are we talking about a cultic site from the Iron One period, but we're talking about Joshua's altar. Now, in the course of this, he probably made a mistake of first publishing these results in the Biblical Archaeological Review before he did in IEJ or before he did in Kadmoniot or any other peer-reviewed or acceptable thing. But we'll give it to them. And I said it has to do a little bit of his biography and that he wasn't really, this is even before he got his doctorate at age 51 from Tel Aviv University. This is even before this, so he might have made a mistake here. It was a tactical mistake, but it proved in the long term to be quite problematic because he made his first claim in I think it was 1986. I was still in primary school, so I don't remember these things as they happened. But he claimed that it was the altar, and immediately jumping on him, Aaron Kempinski, I have him later on, here he is, says, no, it can't be the altar. It was only but even now we're sitting, and I see everybody froze. Can you see me, hear me? Hello?
Yes, we still see you and hear you.
Okay, good. No, for some reason my screen froze. So now we're looking back in retrospect. So I'm now summarizing the different things. We do not have a complete consensus that this is Joshua's altar. Let's just say a very small minority of the academic field believes that it was actually the altar of Joshua. However, and I'm only speaking right now from archaeology. What I'm going to do right now is first summarize the archaeology completely and then go over to the biblical account. I think that's the best methodology. Those that try to integrate too early, again, there's no rule where you're supposed to integrate, like Eilat Mazar, and like Adam Zertal, very often can get this cross-pollination can be very problematic in the final analysis. So let's look at what the site actually has to say. And then we'll try to see what the Bible says and see how they can both go together. So regarding the site itself, we're talking about a very large stone structure. I don't think people can really appreciate the size unless you're standing next to it. Let's show you a picture with people. There's a person standing on top. But take a look at this photograph where there are people standing next to it. It's 9 by 7. It is 9 meters by 7 meters, the outer walls of this structure. Okay, so it's a very large structure. It has, again, large field stones, not well-dressed stones. But I think the most important thing to understand before we go into the actual details is that it was not found within the context of a known village or anywhere near a road. So it's a site. Here is what the reconstruction is. It's really, it's a very hard to get to site. It's a standalone building. There was probably, whoops, I'm trying, for some reason, can you still hear me, see me? Because all of my.
No, not really.
Okay, because my thing completely froze, and I do not have my mouse anymore. Just one moment, I apologize. There we go. Back.
Asher?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm here. I'm just gonna, I am trying to find my mouse and the computer froze. I'm trying to figure out why.
We'll wait for you if you need to
Okay,
shut
no,
down.
all of the, my mouse disappeared and, oh, that's not the mouse. I'm gonna shut down and go back up again. I will be right with you. If anybody has a suggestion of what to do when the Zoom freezes and it takes your mouse,
Just that you close everything or even restart Zoom.
yeah.
All right, guys, I've unmuted you for a little while.
If anyone was thinking of going to Gerizim, give out some dates so we can make a reservation. There's a few people wanted to go. We have 2 people who can drive. Two
I think
drivers.
most of us are unemployed, so I think we're free.
Yeah, but some of us have other commitments, so dates are important.
So why doesn't people put it on the chat when they want to go?
Okay, in the next, after Shavuot, obviously not this week.
Fill out some options. Fill out some options.
Next Sunday.
I am back. Sorry about that.
I'm taking
Okay.
more
All right, hold on, Asher.
I am.
People, I gotta be around. Can't do it next time.
I need permission to share, but I'm back and everything is working now.
Okay, hold on. Okay, Asher, can you share now? Hold on. Asher, for some reason, I cannot unmute you. Hold on.
Now I'm unmuted.
Okay, you're on.
Now I'm unmuted. And here we go. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that, everyone. I will pick up where I left off. Okay, so as I was saying, before we go into the artifacts and try to analyze the site from an archaeological from an archaeological perspective, we have to realize that the site is not within the context of any other settlement. It's not near any other settlement. It's not near Shechem. It's not near any roads. So all of these features stand out when you look to give a final analysis. Okay, let's look at some of the other things that we found. First of all, we found 2 scarabs of probably of Ramses II, maybe Thutmose III, but that date the site to the beginning of the Iron I period. Lots and lots of simple pottery, but that isn't really what made it so interesting. There are a few is that they found one like what we would call chalice, like something that was used probably for incense offerings. They found a die that was from this period. Very, very interesting. Here again are the scarabs. But what was so interesting is that the most, one of the things they found of the greatest abundance was thousands and thousands of butchered animal bones. Goats, sheep, and cows made up for 96% of the amount of bones found. But 4% were fallow deer. This is, if you didn't know what a fallow deer was, the yachmur in Hebrew, this is one. They are kosher animals, but they're chaya, it's a wild animal that, and it was not an animal that is normally brought upon an altar. Let's put that aside for a moment. Again, right now we're just analyzing archaeological data. In terms of the stratigraphy, Adon Zertal identifies 2 distinct stratum. One is stratum 2, which is the initial stratum, which is basically an open cultic site with a few walls, and that's the initial cultic site. And then stratum 1, which is the built stone structure. So must understand that from an archaeological perspective, and this is something that very often is ignored by either guides or other writers or some of the biblical scholars that have taken upon this site, is that the actual altar is not from the initial building of the site. Meaning what's there, and this includes something, again, people don't realize, the dated material, those scarabs and the chalice and some of the other were found in stratum 2, not stratum 1. In the Favisa of 94, stratum 2, which is the initial establishment of the site. Again, when you're excavating, you start from the top. So you count the stratigraphy from the beginning, and then you get, so 1A, 1B, and 2. And then what is later going to be identified as the stone altar is from stratum 1, which is the second phase of the dwelling in the site. And then something very interesting is that Adon Zertal identifies the stone covering not as normal destruction after abandonment, but an intentional covering of the site with field stones or some of the stones in the site. So that's what is found. One more thing, though, and this is very, okay, so what do we have here? So what we have here is a unique site, 1 or 1.5 periods, but what the site here would tell us is it's not a normal settlement, okay? And therefore, but I'm about to say should this be defined as a cultic site? Again, I'm talking archaeology, I'm not yet talking about the Bible. A cultic site. From what I tell you right now, it's borderline, but it looks more like a cultic site. But one of the features, which again is very often ignored, are and I think I have here a picture of it here. I don't have too many of them because they're not well published, and that is the jewelry. They found at the site a few dozen pieces of gold and bronze and silver jewelry. Okay, just to give you a little bit of contrast, in Izbit Sarta, which I would say is a similar type of settlement from a similar type of similar scale in terms of size, similar in terms of the time period, there were 6 found, 6 pieces of gold and silver, and very, very minor. Here we have, not hundreds, but definitely a significant number of earrings and other what we would think or votive items, meaning items that were brought to the site as a gift to a deity. Meaning, all of what I'm now saying is that if I was an archaeologist and this was a site that we found in Timbuktu, I would, and this is something you can ask an archaeologist. You say, if you found a site with X, Y, and Z, and by the way, I did this with all of my chutzpah, it would be called a cultic site. Okay, if that's not enough to prove that, we have another site. This is a more difficult site to get to, called the Bull site. It's in the Shomron. It's in the same region. Okay, it's right over here. Very few people have hung out there. Again, I was in Golani, and if anybody's familiar with Bezek, is over here. This is Bebede. Okay, so so in the fields over here, a friend of Amichai Mazar picked up this figurine and took it home. Okay, this bull figurine, a bronze bull figurine. And Amichai Mazar asked him, where did you find it? And he explained where he found it. They went back and excavated, and they found a one time period cultic site from exactly Iron 1. So the fact that we have a cultic site without the context of a settlement around it, there's no other yeshuv, no other homestead in that area, is something that we have another example of, and with just one unique find. And again, we have other finds here. I think this is if anyone wants to look at it, this is the link to the article in the Biblical Archaeological Review that Amichai Mazar, who's the archaeologist who excavated the site, where he publishes it, we define as a cultic site. So it's not the only one. But as I mentioned, very soon after the public proclamation that we found Joshua's altar, Aaron Kambinsi comes and says, no altar. This is a guardhouse. Again, why is he saying guard? What could be saying guardhouse is because it's not within the context of any type of settlement. Or there's a house, something that looks similar, like a 4-room house that is found there, that it was, let's say, the house of the priest or whatever it was, but it's not a very well-built house. It does not look like the house. We do have other houses, let's say in Gilo. In Gilo, Ami Mazar excavated when they first built some of the Merkaz HaMischari in Gilo, where the post office is. They found a beautiful site from this period, from Iron 1, with all the features of the Israelite pottery and so on, and that is a farmhouse, a small farmhouse with an outline wall and so on. There's a guardhouse involved in there as well, and that would be some type of a comparison. But this is how he defines it, but that's not really what comes out of the excavation. Okay, so over the course of the years, others have suggested that it is a farmhouse. They did that, even though, as I said, it's a very hard claim to make, but it was claimed. But the other claim is, and one that we have to take a lot of consideration, is that it is a cultic site. It's just not the cultic site described in the book of Joshua, because it's not it's not necessarily from the right time period. As I said, the actual building would be after any biblical scholar would place the name, the time of Joshua. And also, is it in the right place? And here we get to its location. The ritual site, as we said, is over here. just going to get my pointer here. The written is right over here. And the Hissus Eval, Gerizim is over here. So we would expect if there was going to be an altar by Joshua in the ceremony, and we're going to look carefully at those verses in a moment, it should be over here, not over here. And so to make a very long discussion in one sentence, Adam Zertal, who was a very powerful man, decides to move mountains. What does he do? He says that this is the actual site of Har Ebal. But Har Gerizim is not over here. Har Gerizim of the Bible is actually Har Kabir, overlooking the Wadi Farah. And when the tribes did their ceremony of establishing a covenant with the Lord, they did so in these two mountains. So he moves Har Kabir over here. How did Har Gerizim go over to the why does Har Gerizim move here? He claims that's from the Samaritans. The Samaritans who were on that mountain using the biblical stories, they manipulated the name of Har Gerizim and moved it from Har Kabir to Har Gerizim. Okay, so that is what Adam Zertal says. Now, going into the actual verses. So today you can see here, this is the sign. I don't know if it's still standing, but Joshua's altar at Mount Ebal. When you're the archaeologist working at the site, you get to decide what the sign will say. Also, it has to be fits within the interests of the local council. But let's look at the actual verses and see what comes out of them, because something very interesting when you actually look at the verses comes out. And I didn't bring the English, but hopefully we can all handle the Hebrew. The events that happen in Har Gerizim and Har Ebal are mentioned in 3 times in the Bible, twice in the book of Deuteronomy and once in the book of Joshua. And as you can see here, the beginning of Parshat Re'eh, and it will be when God will bring you into the land that you will inherit, v'natata et habracha al Har Gerizim, and you shall give the blessing on Mount Gerizim, ve'et haklala al Har Eval, and the curse on, or the curses on Har Eval. If you don't know where it is, and obviously the Jewish people in the desert wouldn't know this, Halohema be'evar Yarden, they are in the other side of the Jordan. Achrei derech mevo hashemesh, beretz haknani ayoshe barava, mula Gilgal. So it's opposite the Gilgal, and we don't really know where the Gilgal is. But this is another thing connecting to Adam Zertal claims that Gilgal isn't necessarily a place, but it's a type, a category of settlement. It's like surrounded by this. And again, if you want to read about it, please go to his thing. He has many sites related to this. And very interesting theories that he has about this. Eitzel Elonei Rare. But this is the key. Elonei More is the opposite, another name for Shechem or opposite Shechem. So we know it's in the vicinity of Shechem. But we don't have any more details about what's actually going on. That we get from the next source, which is the end of Book of Deuteronomy in chapter 27. Where it says, and these are the tribes that shall stand to bless on Mount Gerizim. When you cross over the Jordan, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Yosef, and Benjamin. And these are the tribes that will be responsible for reciting the curses on Har Eval. Ruvain, Gad, Asher, Zvulun, Dan, Naphtali. Ve'anu Levim ve'amru ish kol ram. Okay? But you should realize is that is just part of what's described, because there's the description in addition to standing on both mountains and calling out the blessings and the curses. You shall take the stones. So it clearly says in the Bible that you shall take the stones, that is where you wrote the words of the Torah on plaster that were plastered on stones. And it says, in addition to that, Uvanita sham mizbeach l'Hashem Elokecha, and you shall build there, where? On Har Ebal, an altar to the Lord your God, Mizbach Avanim, a altar of stones, Lo tanif aleim barzel, you shall not make them dressed stones, cut them with iron, and therefore they should be field stones, as was found. Avanim shlemot, and it goes on to come. And you shall offer your offerings there, and so on. And so, I don't know that I would necessarily think that these were two separate events, because we're talking about the same area. But looking at it again, now seeing this new site, you may offer the following analysis. And if you're the Jabo Zev, this is published by Zev Jabo Ehrlich, but others have said this as well, is that there actually were two separate events. Now let's look to see what it says in the book of Joshua. Az yivnei Yehoshua mizbeach l'Hashem Elokei Yisrael b'Har Ebal. And it was then, meaning it might, this is usually a sign in the Bible that we're detached chronologically from the things, events happening, on Har Ebal. Kasher tziva Moshe, as Moshe, the God's servant, so in the book of Moses. Mizbach Havanim, a altar of stones. Asher lo hanif aleim barzel, and so on and so forth, and you shall offer whole offerings. Leizbechu shlamim. And you shall write on these, the white on the stones, the Mishneh Torah, which is the book of Deuteronomy, or another copy of the whole Torah, as God wrote to the Jewish people. V'chol Yisrael v'zkenav v'shotrav v'shotfav omdim mizeh u'mizeh la'aron, and each one is standing on either side of the Aron. Neged HaKohanim. So the first two verses here describe what happens Har Ebal. The next two verses describe what's happening on Har Gerizim and on Har Ebal, when half of the tribes are saying the Kala and half of the tribes are saying the Bracha, or Vayanu Kol Ha'am Amen, that actually the recitation was done by the priests, and Amen was screamed out by the tribes that were represented on either of the mountains. So what we would be suggesting, now, as I said, on first glance, it looks like it's one event. But it's very clear that the Mizbeach was not in Shechem. If it was in Shechem, it would say it's in Shechem. And I'll show you when something is in Shechem, the book of Joshua knows how to say that. Okay, I didn't bring it here, but did I bring the? No. Yeah, yes, in the book, in chapter 24, we have a very peculiar verse, a chapter that many people don't get to or skip or don't understand, because it says, "Vayosof Yehoshua shol shiftei Yisrael Shechema." He brings everyone to Shechem, and then he gives out here is a very good overview of Jewish history, which, and then it says, "Vayichtov Yeshua dvarim ha'ele b'sefer Torah Elokim," and they basically, Joshua asks them, "Do you want to follow the Lord or do you not want to follow the Lord?" And everybody says, "We want to follow him." And then it concludes in these verses, and it says, "Vayichtov Yehoshua dvarim ha'ele," very peculiar. Write all these things down. Vayikach even gula, and he took a very large stone. Vayikimei sham tachat ha'alah. Underneath the Allah is referring to the Allah tree that was from the time of the patriarchs, maybe. Asher b'mikdash Hashem. There's some type of temple to the Lord in Shechem. This is not Har Ebal. This is in Shechem. And this is also a very peculiar thing, because this is really happening at the end of the life of Joshua. He's doing another covenant with all the Jewish people in Shechem. Okay, now let's try to make some sense of all of this. Because what I'm trying to say, I'll just review, let's go back a step, and then we'll take another step forward, is that from an archaeological perspective, this site looks like a cultic site from the Iron One period. That is what I said. That's what it looks like. The Bible describes that there was an event that, now we're going to the Bible, that is taking place in the vicinity of Shechem, involving two distinctive elements. Number one is an altar, offerings, and and it's specifically saying that is in Har Ebal. In addition to this, or with this, again, I don't know from the Bible, not clear, that there is a ceremony that's conducted with the entire Jewish people, half of them on Har Gerizim, half of them on Har Ebal, which means Shechem is in the middle, where they call out blessings and curses, and in a way they reaffirm the covenant with the Lord in the land of Israel. Okay, that is where we stand, more or less at the end of our basic discussion. Here we get to some of the ideas that me and my friends had on the mountain, 1996, overlooking the tomb of Joseph. In order to understand the context of that, let's just say a few things about the book of Joshua. I don't have a time now to go through it in general, but the book of Joshua is a seemingly simple book. There are two sections. One is the first chapter is to talk about the kibush, the conquest, and then the second half is talking about the settlement, nachalut. But if you look a little bit more carefully, there's what you see is that the events that take place in Joshua, or at least claiming to take place in Joshua, in a relatively short amount of time, just from the text, before I jump into archaeology, seem to be things that are coming from many different time periods. Now, the rabbis said, is something that stuck into our head, that it took 7 years to do the conquest and 7 years to do the settlement. 14 years, the whole book. That would be, first of all, it would have been extra human to do that. In addition to that, the rabbis have even bigger difficulty saying, because it says, Bayom avarchem et Yarden, on the day that you go over the Jordan. It says that right over here. And so, being that it's supposed to be done the first day in the Jordan, but this is before they conquer Joshua. So the rabbis have three separate ways of dealing with this very difficult issue. One is Bayom doesn't really mean on that very day. It means as soon as possible afterwards. And I think that's the easiest way. But the rabbis weren't sufficient with that. And there are two other opinions that are brought down, one in Yerushalmi and one in the Talmud Bavli. One is that they didn't actually go to Har Gerizim and Har Ebal because they didn't conquer Shechem at the time. By the way, there's never documentation of conquering Shechem. So they couldn't go into a Canaanite area and the entire tribes do a whole thing and then come back to Gilgal. So what did they do? They set up models. Tulilot Sherafar. They set up these two model hills that everybody got on and pretended it was on Har Gerizim and Har Ebal, and they did this covenant on the day they went over. Whether they made it up later on is a separate story, but that's what one opinion of the rabbis is. The other opinion is that there was an unbelievable miracle, and the entire Jewish people did a unbelievable marathon because everybody ran to Shechem, did this ceremony of the altar and all the sacrifices, and then came back to Gilgal and continued with the rest of the conquest. It's very interesting because you have the conquest of Jericho, the conquest of Beit El, and then right away, which would be the next geographic site, would be going into Shechem. And that's where in where in the 8th chapter of Joshua, where you see Az Bana Yehoshua Mizbeach B'Har Ebal. So the difficulty in explaining when and how this event happens and how this event relates to the residents of Shechem, which I said were never conquered, and what's going to happen in chapter 24 is very, very difficult even from the rabbis. And what I would like to now suggest is a reading of the book of Joshua, and particularly we'll read this is in a somewhat new way. And again, this is opinion. You can take it or leave it, but this is a way that I think would be a very both meaningful and a legitimate way of reading the book of Joshua. And this is also based on over 100 years of archaeological research, where, and you can see Shuli in her blog published about Chatzor. Chatzor is wonderful because Chatzor really fits many of the things that the book of Joshua says, that it was burnt down, that they killed all the idols, and so on and so forth. And if it's the time more or less the appropriate time. But then you have the site of Lachish that, according to archaeologists, existed another 100 years after the time of Joshua under Canaanite hands. And so if I summarize all of the different sites that relate to the Joshua context, some fit, some don't, and some could go either way. Which means that it's very difficult to say, oh, the Bible proves that, the archaeology proves that the Bible is correct. That's a very difficult statement to make. But one of what we can say, and so again, who wrote the book of Joshua? According to the traditional opinion, which is in the Talmud Bavli tractate Baba Batra, Joshua wrote his book. So he summarized all the things that happened in his lifetime, and he wrote his book. Then Akon comes the Abarvanel. And Abarvanel, in his very long and underappreciated Perush, says impossible that Joshua wrote his book for many different reasons. He cites specifically the events that took place after Joshua's life, but I clearly can see that Abarvanel was troubled by other things, and he says no. The book of Joshua is written with a much greater perspective, much later on, and he claims it was Navi Shmuel, the Shmuel that when Shmuel was with the challenges of establishing the united monarchy, Shaul and David, he needed to answer the Jewish people, how did we get to this point? And the book of Joshua, with the book of Shoftim and Judges, are both, and by the way, connected to the book of Ruth, is also in the context of these discussions, are all part of a literature that Shmuel puts out in order to be the PR for establishing first the kingdom of Saul and later the kingdom of David. And you can think about that on your own. But what I would like to claim, in addition to what Abarvanel claims, is that not just is it written with a perspective, but it's a completely re-edited work. What does that mean? It means the purpose of writing the book of Joshua, its editorial intent, is all meant to give over a very specific prophetic message, a very specific biblical message. And what is that message? After learning the book in toto, again, I'm not going through it now, and I could do this at another time if there's interest, but you can show through the development of it. But in a nutshell, after all the analysis, it's trying to show how the book of Joshua is the sixth book of the Torah, is the fulfillment of the promises that we find in the 5 books of Moses, is the continuation, whether they listen or don't listen, but of the same book. And therefore, the structure and the themes are based on the structure and themes of the book of the 5 books of Moses. And so, therefore, what would I try to claim? That after the initial first events of the conquest of Jericho and the Passover and doing the Brit Milah, what are they now ready to do? What is the parallel in the book of Joshua to the book of the book of Shemot particularly, but the 5 books of Moses, is that Har Gerizim and Har Ebal didn't take place in this time period, nor did it take place at one time, but it's being framed as Bana Yoshua Tamizbeach as a compare and contrast to the covenant that was done in Mount Sinai. And here are these ideas that we came up with standing on the mountain. Is it Har Gerizim and Har Ebal is the land of Israel answer to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, meaning it's the next step of establishing the covenant. And so, as you can see here, I just brought some of the ideas. There are many more that you can add to this. One is in the wilderness, detached of any geographical context. Here, Har Gerizim and Har Ebal are physically the middle of the country, and I'll get to my little point there. I have a little vort to add to this as well. One, Mount Sinai, God is on the mountain. Moses is on the mountain, where the mountain is above them. In the covenant at Har Gerizim and Har Ebal, the tribes are on the mountains. They're the ones. It's on two sides of the mountains. Even the theme of Brit Bein HaBetarim, when you cut something in half, is a way that they would make covenants at the time. So it's like representing the two sides of the country coming together. You can expand on that on your own if you're interested. The second is God speaking and man affirms. And on Har Gerizim, the people are speaking. The people are willingly accepting, as opposed to being, according to the rabbis, they were accepted by force or by fear. God is, but it says that they were the trembling and the fear that was instilled here. That is all void and not existent in Har Gerizim and Har Ebal. One is God writing the covenant on the stones. Etzba Elokim. Here is the people writing on a very human way of writing it on plaster, on the stones for generations, and so on and so forth. And people passive and people being active. So the Har Gerizim and Har Ebal. Now, what am I doing here? What we're trying to claim is that both the identification as Joshua's altar, okay, and the identification of the altar and the ceremony of the 12 tribes saying the curses and the blessings, okay, have to be reorganized. You see this picture that we had at the beginning, which is that right away, whether the first day or very soon after, the entire Jewish people come to the city of Shechem, and on either side of the mountains do this ceremony all at once. That didn't ever happen, nor does it work, not with the texts and not with the archaeology. But what could have happened? I'm not saying this is the only way. I am now giving over a possible reconstruction of the archaeology fitting with the biblical narrative based on this new reading. Is that we have the Jewish people, according to the book of Joshua, again, according to the geographical succession, should have come up through Emet HaMichmatat, should have come up from the south. But if you haven't conquered, and there were other Canaanites living there, there's another way to get to Shechem, and that is through Wadi Farah, where I spent many, many hours looking at the swimming pool and all of the different other things, very not interesting on Wadi Farah, Nahal Tirza, is you can come up from, it's the easiest way, by the way, most convenient, most easiest if you're coming up there. But if you haven't conquered Shechem and the people of Shechem are not yet friendly with you, you're not going to go into the city. You're not going to be able to go into the city or into that area. You want to get to Shechem because it's related to Abraham and it's related to the themes that we're going to discuss in a moment. So what do? You have the altar or the first ceremonies. I'm not claiming there's an altar there at the first stage, on the mountain of Ebal. Okay, where the people of Shechem won't see you, where nobody sees you because you're coming in from the back door and no one sees you there. And you do the ceremony there, and then you go back to Gilgal. Only later, when the entire area was sufficiently conquered and there was peace with the different Canaanite cities, either fear or by conquest, whether it's Ha'ai and others, were they able to go and do the full ceremony at Gerizim and Ebal. And later, the site where this initial, I would call it a thanksgiving offering of coming into the land, just like Abraham did, that was done on Mount Ebal, later became a local pilgrimage site that they built an altar on, similar to the altar that was given there. Whether or not it was part of the original, whether or not they did a ceremony the way they were supposed to, I don't know. But it's a site that later developed. Why was it intentionally abandoned? And this is something that Zertal does discuss, is because Shiloh is going to replace it. And there's the Shiloh replacing there, Menashe replacing the Ephraim is something that's happening over the course of the initial stages of the settlement period. Again, documented by both Finkelstein and Zertal archaeologically, and this is what we'll be reflecting with in the transfer of book of Joshua to the book of Judges. And therefore, what am I claiming is that when the later prophet, which the Bravanel says is Samuel, but from our perspective, it could be any prophet, the author of the book of Joshua is looking back with perspective. The literary editing of these stories are all placed together. This is where Arlichta says they're different, but they're placed together with a very specific intent. It's not just random, but it's a specific attempt to, in order to frame the events that happened at Gerizim and Ebal as the fulfillment comparison in the book of Joshua to the events at Sinai. So they're put together intentionally, because at Sinai you also had the altar and the covenant and the stones, just like you had at Gerizim and Ebal. So you want to see those two things, but in essence, both in terms of what they were supposed to be and what they mean, and in terms of what actually happened, they're two separate events. So now I'm giving the reason why there is an interest in putting those two things together. Now, what I will add are two more little things that you can take or leave, but I think they have. First of all, before we go on to that, what about Shechem itself? Shechem is a very interesting riddle, because the king of Shechem was one of the largest cities in the Middle Bronze Age, a very important city in the Late Bronze Age. You can see that from the Alamarna writings, but it doesn't seem to be conquered. And the people of Shechem the Canaanites there don't seem to be ever disappear. And the things that happen in Shechem in the book of Judges also are very peculiar, because are they Jewish? Are they not? Are they Israelite? Are they not? And so on. So let's suggest something that comes out of the book of Chronicles, of all places, is that the tribes of Joseph had both land relationships during the time in Egypt with the people in Shechem. Whether or not they were friendly with them, or whether or not they had familial connection with them, what I'm trying to say, and this is something I'm not suggesting others, is that the tribe of Ephraim had some of the families that were living in the area of Shechem even before leaving Egypt. They didn't go out of Egypt, and they weren't part of the covenant in Sinai. And so the people of Shechem, with the people of the Jewish people around as witnesses or as representatives of the Jewish people, had to, this is what I'm now describing as the last chapter of the book of Joshua, and they did this conversion of the people of Shechem because they kind of had to, because they weren't either they weren't part of the Jewish people that had left Egypt and arrived there. Again, this is complete theory. Maidan has spoken and written about it, but it does allow us to entertain the notion that Shechem was never conquered and was friendly, and that, by the way, would have allowed us to come in and do the ceremony initially, but we'll leave that aside for another time. But it says that Shechem is a little bit different in that if you learn what's going on with the people of Shechem in the book of Judges, this can kind of explain the ambivalence to as exactly, are they part of the tribes, are they not part of the tribes, are they part of the story or not? And that's sort of where they fit, is that they were later in a group to join the tribes, and therefore there's an ambivalence to they're part of the tribes of Joseph, but they're not exactly on the same level, same standard, and that's something that we can, again, leave for another time. The final thing I will say about Shechem is where it thematically fits in terms of its position in the land of Israel. And this goes to the lie that we say in every time that we say the grace after meals. Because we say that it's a Eretz Tova ve Aruka. Aruka means long. What's long about this land? But again, as tour guides, we should know this is not the way we should look at the country. We should look at it this way. Because the perspective in the biblical time is looking towards the east, Pnei Kedem. And therefore, when you look at the country, it is in front of you as long ways. Okay, the orientation is of that. And therefore, where is Shechem placed? Shechem is the natural center of the country. It's a national capital of the country. Jerusalem is too far south if you want to have a geographic center. Part of Jerusalem's history is that it's not the geographic, it's not the expected place for the house of the Lord to be built. The more natural place where Abraham comes into the country, where the Jewish people come to the country, is Shechem. Shechem is the doorway to the country. Now, we all know the doorway is in the front of the house, right? Well, what did the houses look like at that time? They looked like a 4-room house. This is the doorway. And so what I would like to suggest, again, this is a vort, is that Shechem is the thematic doorway to the country. That it is the doorway, when your house looks like this, so the center is where the doorway is, and that is what Shechem will represent. So, what do we have here? We have an amazing site from the biblical period that, according to almost all, looks like a cultic site that was enthusiastically embraced by the archaeologists as being the site referenced in the book of Joshua. We've raised many, many problems with this being the book of Joshua, the actual site. We've also said that the text itself is seemingly not clear to exactly what happened and how it relates to the people in Shechem, and is it their first day when they come back, and so on. And we've offered, again, I'm saying this is a possible interpretation of how we can integrate both the biblical story and the archaeology without doctoring either of them too much, but with embracing both of them as good sources and saying how we can make a meaningful answer, again, relating to the holiday of Shavuot. Now, I was not able to follow all of the comments here. I will try to I see one or two things that I'd like to just mention that I think are obvious from what I'm talking about, but if you're not clear on this, and that is in terms of the chronology. The biblical chronology, as reflected in the two sources, in the book of Kings, where it says 480 years from leaving the land of Israel, from Yetziat Mitzrayim to the building of the temple in the time of Solomon, and the 300 years in the letter that was sent to Ammon there, both those two dates are incompatible with the archaeological record. I'm not now going to talk about that. We talk about another time. They're incompatible. And therefore, everything I was speaking about is the... I'll get to that. Ruthie, I'll answer your question in a second. If I wasn't clear enough. And therefore, everything is based on the dating of the chronological dating. In a nutshell, basically, you have to assume that all the dates of the Bible were re-edited at the final stage, time of Yirmiyahu, to fit within their understanding of the dating of the high priests. That's for another time. Just understand that none of what I'm saying works with the 400 years that you have available there. No, we're talking about a time span of the Joshua judges from around 1300 to about 250 to 300 years. That's the entire time period you're given. Now, how does it relate to Shavuot? Because the event that happened at Har Gerizim and Har Ebal, which we don't have a date, but I will say thematically is on the holiday of Shavuot, and it does fit. If you look in the Joshua story, that would be the appropriate time. and I hope some Chazal said it, but if they didn't, they should have, is the Matan Torah of Eretz Yisrael. It's the acceptance of the covenant of the land of Israel, fitting to the themes, the new themes, that instead of being passively receiving everything in the Midbar, we actively have to take part in it. And that's what the ceremony is supposed to represent. Okay, so that's, if that answers your question, Ruthie. I answer you, Ruthie, because that's what I see. So you're welcome. If there's anything else that needs to be clarified, the Nachal Tirtza route. Let me go back to the let's go back to this map, which is probably the orange map here. The Nachal Tirtza route is the most, there's a road going there today. It is the easiest route to take. It goes like this. It goes whoop, up like this. Let's see if this map is a little bit better. Yes, from the Jordan River, it comes up here. This is it, right, this one. And it goes right to this site. You see that? It goes right there. And you go to the back door of Shechem, so you don't have to mess with the Shechem people, and you don't have to really mess with anybody. Doubt the Tirtza people would have been involved. So that would be the answer there. Okay. If there are any other questions that I didn't answer, if there are any other things that you'd like to say, this would be the best time to do so. So there we have it. Thank you, Adam Zertal, who passed away in 2015. Otherwise, that would be wonderful to be able to hear what he has to say about these things. But he does leave a legacy of many other studies about this time period, which are worthy of further discussion. Unfortunately, I actually wrote a paper for my course in Ami Mazar. I did on Har Gerizim and Har Ebal, and I consulted him at the time. Most scholarship today doesn't assume the biblical story is in any way indicative of what we should find in archaeology, and therefore very often if a person is trying to choose, it's also very controversial. So you have very few people actually studying these things because they're so controversial. You have a few Christian scholars that are still interested, that are working on it, but almost all of my contemporaries went to study prehistoric and Roman. I went to Sabai Cheni. Very few Jews are actually working with. In Ariel and in Bar Ilan, you have a few people working on it, but some of the core really difficult issues of archaeology and Bible have been left just lying there, and very few people have taken the task to really try to integrate them. But that's again for another time. So we've gone. Yeah.
That is because.
Let me get back to. Wait. Let me just get to see everybody because I'm on.
Asher.
Okay.
That's because no one wants to be accused of being a biblical archaeologist.
Exactly. I know, but listen. But even you have to be careful, because some of the things, and I've had numerous arguments and discussions that will be all been known, is you can't be a cherry picker. Meaning, one of the things you find with some of these people, and you can see it in books like this one here. Where is it? This one here, which is one of the only books ever written in Hebrew, never translated to English, that deal with this straight on, is that a lot of the things don't fit with the biblical story. So if you're gonna take archaeology as a tool, you have to be you have to have academic integrity. You have to really take it seriously, and you have to be consistent. So when it proves, when it disproves, you have to come with some type of other meaningful explanation, and for some it can be very dangerous. Okay. Any other questions about the things that we discussed, or things that weren't clear, or so on?
Thank you very much.
It was really wonderful. Thank you very much. I just want to add one thing, totally not relevant to this, but you mentioned of Yoel Ben Nun, and the last time I had a tour with him, he happened to, he often loves this area. He had such high regard for Adam Zertal that when Adam Zertal passed away, he said Kaddish for him for the year because he knew nobody in his family would, which I think shows you the regard that he held him.
Adam Zertal had again, it had to do a little bit with what happens when he was sitting for a year on his hospital bed, which for a time was almost his deathbed. So he had a whole new way of looking at life, looking at the Torah, and he was very warm to Jewish tradition and things like that. Again, that doesn't make for a good archaeologist necessarily. Those aren't but he was also a good archaeologist. But he was also an archaeologist that thought out of the box, which is a phenomenal thing. And one of the things that he did, I'll give 2 examples of things that he did. One, he excavated a site in the Iron Valley, which was very, very odd type of dwellings, that the only comparison was found in Sardinia. And he said, yes, these people are from Sardinia. You know, so that's one. Another one is he finds, listen, this is related somewhat to this. He finds about 6 or 7 sites in the Jordan Valley, sites that look like feet. Yes, sites that look like feet. Now, we're about to have Shavuot and do Aliyah Regel, which I joke with my kids is going up by foot, but it's the pilgrimage. But it could be that the initial concept of pilgrimage to God is going to a site that represented God's foot on earth. Okay, and that's how that fits within God not having a body. We'll deal with another time, but God does have a body in the Bible, and he does have feet, and we know that we can't connect to God anywhere higher than his feet. We're below his feet, but that is what. So we have this site next to Argaman that he excavated, and he all places within the context of the early settlement that happened in this area. And so the tribes would have gradually come in from Jordan, settled in that area. I will add one more point that is often completely overlooked, and that is during this entire time period, what we're calling the end of the Late Bronze and early Iron One, Egypt has direct control over the city-states of Canaan, of Canaan. Okay, in the Middle Bronze Age, these were mighty independent city-states that had economic relations. In the Late Bronze Age and early Iron One Age, there was direct Egyptian control. Okay, when Saul is supposed to be conquering Beit She'an or fighting outside Beit She'an with the Philistines, there's an Egyptian garrison at Beit She'an. So understand that there's the Bible intentionally ignores the fact we've left Egypt. We didn't leave Egypt. We were still in Egypt for another 100 years until Egypt left Canaan. So there's a whole thing going on there regarding that. So even if you want to accept more or less the framework of the Bible, what I'm trying to say is that to best understand what actually happened, archaeology is an amazing tool, but you have to expand your boundaries, and Adam Zertal is one of the most amazing people to burst through those boundaries.
Right. No,
Okay.
I fully agree.
Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. It was absolutely wonderful. Really, really enjoyed it.
Okay.
It has been a
I
long
hope it
time
was
since I
clear.
went there.
Unfortunately,
Very
it's a site
clear.
that it is very hard to get to. It's also a little bit disappointing when you actually get there, because after you go through so much effort in getting there, it's a little bit of you don't really see Joshua's statue there. So
I agree with you 100%.
So therefore, I prefer doing it this way than actually going there. So, but it is a way to understand what I'm talking about in terms of how it relates to Shechem, and how, because only when you're standing there can you really understand the size, how it relates to Shechem, how it relates to Wadi Farah, and what I was trying to explain about how, if they came, where they came from, and when they came. Okay, anything else?
Asher, thank you so much. This was fabulous. It was great.